interpret and to tell the story of the soldiers that fought here on this battlefield 164 and 163 years ago. So we tell the stories about both First and Second Manassas, the two battles that were fought here on our park property. This weekend, of course, we are celebrating the 164th anniversary of the First Battle of Manassas. So we actually have a bunch of different events here happening. We have some living history. We will have a firing demonstration at 2 p.m. behind you at the Oak Grove. So I'm running on the clock, gonna try and finish up right on time so you can get over there and see that. With that being said, our program here today is going to be entitled Faces of the Fallen. It is a work that's done in conjunction with some of our other staff members. For this past year, we want to do something new at our visitor center, so we helped to collect over 120 photographs of soldiers that were killed at either First or Second Manassas. And we wanted to bring some faces, bring some names to faces, right? To tell people about the human interest, the human stories of battle. It's important to talk about combat at the big, 5,000 foot level, to say the troops moved here and they fired this many rounds, but I think it's also a little bit more practical to take things down a notch, to look at an individual soldier, in this case two individual soldiers, what their stories are. Where did they grow up? How did they grow up? How do they interpret the Civil War? And ultimately, how do they meet their demise here on the battlefield itself? So you guys ready to learn about our two soldiers here today? Yes. Fantastic, good, well, welcome. You're just in time to hop on. So, our two soldiers here today, going to be two individuals. We're going to follow in the footsteps of two. We have this young man here by the name of William L. Paxton. William L. Paxton. And luckily we have two young ones here. I need you two. Come up. I need your help and assistance. Who wants to be Paxton? Okay, you be Paxton. Go ahead. Do me a huge favor. Huh? You'll find that out in a second, don't you worry. Do me a huge favor. Go ahead and show everyone there with William L. Paxton. This is one of our soldiers here. He's Corporal William L. Paxton. And feel free to go ahead and get a little closer. Show them all as well. And you have another soldier here today, by the name of William Baxter Ott. This is going to be our second soldier here that we're going to talk about. Now both of these soldiers, from their photographs, they look rather old or rather young?
Old.
Oh, old?
Yeah.
Well, the photograph looks old, perhaps. They're youngins. They're young fellas. There's about 22 years old, both of them here by 1860, and she already knows the drill. She's good. Wow. You guys trained her well. That's all right. But yeah, so these are our two soldiers here today. Now, these two young individuals, we're going to learn a little bit about their stories, but they will fight here on the battlefield of First Manassas, and they're going to fight with a group that we call the 4th Virginia Company I, okay? 4th Virginia Company I. So 4th Virginia is their regiment. Company I is their company, their smaller subset within that regiment. Now, Company I has a pretty interesting name and story, and we'll learn a little bit more about that as we go along the way. But for now, let's go ahead and actually figure out who these two young individuals are. First up is going to be William L. Paxton. Now, you'll notice both of them are named William, okay? It's going to be a little bit confusing. So to help ease that confusion, we're going to just call them by their last names. We're going to call Paxton, we're going to call Ott, okay? So let's go ahead and talk about Mr. Paxton here first. William L. Paxton was born on January 15th, 1839. Any birthday buddies, January 15th? No? Close? Not even close, man. I'm 0 for... Oh, yeah? When's your birthday?
10 days before.
10 days before, so the 5th of January. All right, good. Well, see, that's why I gave him that. I knew, right? So William L. Paxton, born January 15th, 1839. His parents, William Squire Paxton, Squire was his nickname, and Sarah Pettit Burks. Now, young William grew up on his father's plantation just south of the James River in Virginia proper. Squire, William Paxton, again his father, was a pretty wealthy landowner at the time. He had a pretty large property, somewhere about 500 total acres, and he enslaved about 10 people on his land and plantation. Now, young William Paxton grew up with a very firm belief. Again, he's a very well-off, young, well-to-do family, and he grew up with a firm belief that he's going to inherit portions of his family property and continue his father's work. Keep in mind that idea of patrilineage, right? Passing on the family property then to the eldest son, and then so on and so forth from there. In 1841, William was 2 years old, and his sister, Jane Elizabeth Beatty Paxton, was born as well. And this small family, again, incredibly well-to-do, but I think the most important thing in Paxton's life was actually going to church services. Now, his father, William Squire Paxton, was frequently called upon to organize church members and was noted as a very moral and religious character at the Falling Springs Presbyterian Church. That church is still there here today. Now, does anyone attend services today, out of curiosity? Anyone? Absolutely, right? Now, does anyone grow up attending services? Maybe as a young boy or young girl, maybe going to church services, right? If you hear, right, if you're sitting in maybe the pews or the seats of your congregation, what happens if you start to doze off?
Pastor might call your name.
Might call your name, maybe, and your parents will hit you, say, "Wake up," right? Making me look bad, right? Well, this happens to Mr. William Paxton, actually, in the year 1845. He's attending, again, the Falling Springs Presbyterian Church, when lo and behold, the pastor himself calls out young William by name, and he has to now stand in the front holding a candle. So there you go. So let that be a lesson to you. Do not fall asleep during a sermon. But I think it's interesting here, and again, we don't know much about William Paxton's specific mindset or his worldview or his writings, but I always like to think and maybe reflect for a little bit that maybe William L. Paxton, he's taking every lesson, every sermon, every parable to heart. So he's growing up with a moral and religious character. William also had a grandfather, a gentleman by the name of John Grigsby, and as he talked to his grandfather, there's stories from his grandfather, John Grigsby, who was a Revolutionary War hero in Virginia. Young Paxton is growing up hearing stories about his grandfather's prowess on the battlefield, charging forward onto the battlefield with swords and sabers, right? So this young man is growing up with a very firm moral character, but also with a historic character as well. His literal grandfather helping to fill his mind with military prowess. So as he hears stories about this, there's no doubt he's excited and ultimately interested in possibly one day serving in the military. So next up is our other soldier here, William Baxter Ott. Now, we don't have an actual birthday for him, so I'm not going to say if anyone shares his birthday, but he was also born in the year 1839. He was a son to William Henry Ott and Mary Strickler Ott in Augusta County, Virginia. William Baxter Ott grew up with a very full house. He had 5 siblings and 4 half-siblings following his mother's death in 1849. So that's a pretty jam-packed house there. Now, being the oldest surviving son, as his father passes away shortly thereafter, Baxter takes it upon himself to ensure the safety and security of his family. So again, he's the one taking care of the property. He's the one kind of taking care of his siblings and half-siblings as well. Baxter's father, William, before he passed, he was only recorded as owning and enslaving 2 individuals there on their property. Their property itself is also not very large, only about 100 acres, so it's a rather smaller size, but still relatively pretty large. Similar to Paxton, Ott also grew up hearing stories about the American Revolution from his grandfather that lived right next door. But the Ott family, again, in the Augusta County countryside, Baxter in particular really longed to do something else than farming throughout his entire career. He longs to go to school. So again, we have one very well-to-do family here with William L. Paxton and Mr. Ott here again in a more rural, more agrarian lifestyle from there. Now, as these young men go off to school, they're going to go ahead and go to a location known as Washington and Lee College, and we'll hear more about their college careers at our next stop as we go down that way towards the Confederate gun line. So feel free to follow me from there.
Where did Paxton grow up? Just right?
Yeah, below the James River. It's a little bit up to the James River, closer towards where the Blue Ridge is. Above, yeah. I neglected the actual county. I forget the county names. I know the James is long. Paxton. Again, I didn't say a town. I don't really have a town like that. Upper James. I know, it's a gorgeous day. Before I was out in kits, I had my second Rhode Island kit on. No, I was just over here. Okay. Right here. Yeah, over there. That's right there. Yeah. has certainly been a bit of an issue. I know, yeah, that's true. The underground spring also does not help. I've been keeping a close eye on the weather as I'm trying to figure out what's going on here.
Spring here, so it's like that all the time.
There is, yeah, and it's pretty boggy the way it is, and then we'll rest and regroup for a second here. I apologize, I didn't tell you that we're going to be doing a river crossing here.
I didn't even make it. I have to go down to the old stone bridge.
Yeah, we'll have to go all the way down to the bridge and over and across.
I should give him my shirt.
I do apologize.
Stuff on my shirt.
I do apologize for
You
that.
can circle around if you want.
Oh, there is some way around that?
Yeah.
Good job, ma'am. Good.
There we go.
Grandma, just do that.
Let's do that, Grandma. You got it. Any particular questions thus far? Anything folks really want to know or curious about? That's okay, yeah.
Are we talking about First Battle of Manassas or Second Battle of Manassas?
We are talking about the First Battle of Manassas, July 21st, 1861.
What day was that? Was it a Sunday?
It's a Sunday. Yeah, it's a Sunday. And I think what's really interesting is that there's a church just beyond our northern boundary of our battlefield that was actually supposed to have services that day. And there were folks already starting to gather there at that church, some with their parasols and whatnot, and started to ring the church bells to alert individuals to come to services as the Union infantry is starting to cross around the northern sections of that park across Sudley Ford. So it's interesting seeing, the mix of civilian lifestyle versus this military maneuvers that is now happening right in front of their very eyes.
So where were the northern soldiers coming from? Down there?
Yeah. So we are facing, if you all are looking that way, we are facing straight east towards Washington, D.C., towards the capital of the U.S., right? So Union troops, again, are coming from the east, moving towards the west in that direction, going and utilizing a main road that we call today Route US 29. It's the historically known as the Warrenton Turnpike. And so as they're using the Warrenton Turnpike, they get close to Centerville, Virginia, and they start to realize that the Confederates are kind of in a defensive line along the Bull Run. The Bull Run is a creek. It's a small creek, not very wide, not very fast moving, but it has steep banks, right? And that's where the Confederates set up their defenses along that Bull Run Creek. And so as saying Bull Run Creek, that's redundant. Yeah, Bull Run, right? But as Union troops kind of test the waters, so to say, test the crossing points, they realize the Confederates are a little too strong. So the Union troops are now trying to move and find their way around the flank, the side of the Confederate Army, right? Because the Confederate Army is facing that way, to face the oncoming U.S. troops. So these U.S. troops find a crossing point to the north, and they're the ones kind of going up and around, marching. And they start that march about, it says on paper, it's supposed to be about 2, 3 a.m. They truly don't get moving until a little bit much later than that, closer to about 6 o'clock, is when most of the column starts to move itself. Yeah, a little closer to about 6 o'clock. The first shots of the battle are fired a little bit after 6 o'clock by a lieutenant, a U.S. lieutenant, with a massive 30-pounder Parrott gun. It is the largest gun in the U.S. field arsenal. And he writes in his diary, Lieutenant Peter Conover Haynes, he says, "My gun had the loudest bark in the Army, so therefore I was the one designated to open up the fighting," which I think is pretty cool from there. All right, so again, last we left off, the battle has, yes?
So if they were coming, the Northerners were coming from this way, because did they have guns that they were walking with?
Yeah.
Did they have artillery?
Absolutely, yeah. So the U.S. military at that time, the field pieces that they had a mixture of tons of different ordnance. Mainly a lot of new 10-pounder Parrott guns that we'll talk about a little bit later. They also had a mix of older guns, newer guns, but they're all horse-drawn artillery, right? So you had 6 horses per gun, and you had 6 guns per battery, which is a grouping of artillery. So you had, 6 guns in a battery, close to about 100 horses for a battery as well. So they're all moving along with the army. So you have a mixture. You have infantry, men marching shoulder to shoulder. They're the ones doing most of the fighting, the bulk of the fighting. You have the artillery, and then you have the cavalry as well, men on horseback, doing some of the reconnaissance, some of the faster maneuvering stuff. So very good. All right, where's my Paxton and Ott? I need you guys up here. Yeah, you guys are the stars of the show here. All righty. Okay, so again, last we left off with our 2 soldiers here. They wanted to go to School. They want to go to college, right? So they ended up going to school. And this is, again, much before the battle, but it's important to know who these soldiers are first. So, as these young men go off to school, they enroll at the illustrious Washington and Lee, then just known as Washington College. Now it's Washington and Lee, excuse me, in Lexington, Virginia. And Paxton's freshman year there at Washington College in 1859, I'm going to go ahead and pass this photograph around as well. This is a photograph of Washington College campus, a little bit post-war. I think it's about 1866. But you get an image of what that college campus looked like, right? Did anyone go off to college, go off to experience school? Feel free to pass that around. Anyone go to college, have a college experience? Yeah. Yeah, what's your alma mater? Go ahead.
West Point.
West Point.
Yeah.
All right, there you go. There's one for you, Paul, there.
78.
Pete Davis.
Virginia. Very good. Go Cavaliers. Anyone else?
Wisconsin.
Union College in Wisconsin. Very, very good. Badger. Very good. All right. So again, if you remember your college experience, do you remember it fondly?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, what's your favorite part of college? I won't ask
Graduation.
that. I won't ask that.
Drink.
Graduation, perhaps. And I think that's what's really amazing, right? Is that everyone has college experiences, everyone sees it, has somewhat similar experiences. But for young Paxton, right, he really excelled in his college career. William L. Paxton, his freshman year at Washington College in 1859, he showed great promise. He ranked 3rd overall in his class of over about 25. Paxton excelled in mathematics, ranked 2 in his class. Declamation, that's a good old word. Declamation, anyone know what declamation means? It's your speech making, yeah, absolutely. He also ranked 2nd in his class. Paxton also performed what was described as adequately in Greek. We don't know where that ranks, but adequately is good enough. As well as Latin and composition. So you're a good student, Paxton. You do a pretty darn good job. And his stellar freshman year was highlighted with a 100 out of 100 for conduct, right? So he's a very good. You got the wrong guy. Now, Ott's freshman year, again, a little bit later on, he's going to enter into school a year later in 1860, was equally successful, but we're unsure of his exact marks. But as the American Civil War starts, right? Remember, when did the American Civil War start? April 1861, right? I mean, we could argue on the start date, right? But April 1861 is the firing on Fort Sumter, right? So young men on both sides flocked to the colors and signed their names on papers on the dotted line and joined these Civil War regiments. Both Paxton and Ott will volunteer as a company of men formed at their college, at Lexington College, and that company, again comprising of about 73 young men, will take the name of the Liberty Hall Volunteers. It's inspired by the old college's name during the American Revolution, known as Liberty Hall, right? What's the thing these two guys had in common with their grandfathers?
They both fought in the American Revolution.
Absolutely, both fought in the American Revolution, right? So imagine that history, that legacy weighing on you. You are now, carrying on your grandfather's legacy. You now need to take up that mantle, take up that flag, take up that rifle, and join in line as well. So both these young men are going to volunteer in the Liberty Hall Volunteers. And it was inspired, again, by that American Revolution name of the college. And it was led, that company, by one of their professors, Captain James White. And the young men drilled and practiced their military maneuvers. Now, has anyone ever seen the movie Gods and Generals? I'm talking to a bunch of history buffs. Of course you've seen it, right? And it was mixed reviews.
Boring at times.
Yeah, I know.
Apologists.
Apologists, perhaps. But one thing...
Neo-Confederate propaganda.
Possibly.
It also sucks.
One might say that. I think what's interesting, though, is there is that one scene, right, where the soldiers are doing bayonet drill, and Jackson rides up and he says, "Drill, drill, Captain White, we will teach them to use the bayonet like the Greek Xenophon," right? And that is the Liberty Hall Volunteers. That is those young men there. That is Captain White, yeah, and he's, "We will be your Greek phalanx," or however his accent is, right? But yeah,
Adequate.
Adequate indeed. Again, I'm a Yankee. I'm from Pennsylvania. I don't know what my southern accent is. Anyway, so again, these young men, they're practicing their military maneuvers. And by April of 1861, this college company, as it's referred to, will receive their first uniforms, all made by local women in the Lexington community. A line from a newspaper, the Staunton Vindicator, on April 26, 1861, said this: "The ladies of Staunton, especially the pupils of different female institutions here, have entwined their brows with glory wreaths of evergreen, which beautifully reflect the fresh and buoyant courage of their hearts. For days they have been busily engaged in making the uniforms of the new volunteer companies, scarcely permitting 24 hours to pass after the order had been placed in their hands, ere the full uniform, neatly made, was presented to the young soldier. What a touching evidence of the affection of these fair daughters of Virginia and the South for the sunny climate of their nativity. The sweetheart comparison her lover, and with a smile and a tear, she bids him go and dare and do, and then return for his reward in the gift of the hand that fashioned the badge of his calling. God bless these sweet girls, and God speed and protect our brave boys. Now, the uniforms of these young men, it's a very simple uniform. Again, First Manassas, there's a lot of different uniforms worn here on the battlefield. Now, William Baxter Ott here in this image, go ahead up and show folks that image. That is the uniform that these young men are wearing. It's a battle shirt, so it's not a very cumbersome garment. It's thin. It's not expertly made. Again, it's handcrafted. So, but I think what's interesting, it has a couple touches of military bearing on it, right? The buttons, the trim, the black trim on the uniform, and again, that's what these soldiers are going to be wearing. Now, again, there's 10 companies in a regiment, a larger regiment, so every single company would have a different uniform. So it's a little difficult to tell who's who in a regiment. But as the unit prepared and was placed into a larger regiment, they were placed into the 4th Virginia Volunteer Infantry. And their company designation, again, was Company I, Liberty Hall Volunteers. That regiment was then organized even further into a brigade, known as the 1st Brigade, Army of Shenandoah. You are the 1st Brigade. Another some general's reference there. Led by, again, Colonel Thomas Jonathan Jackson. Now, again, Jackson, if you look behind you there, will have his own statue a little later on, right? He will have a pretty big role to play there. And it's important to note that, again, as we make monuments and memorials, even in the 1930s when that statue, that monument was created, we sometimes reflect who people think that individual is, rather than sometimes who he truly is. And I will tell you, Jackson did not look like that. That is certainly not Jackson. Instead,
Or his horse.
Or his horse, for that matter, yeah. And for context, his horse was named Little Sorrel. It was a 15/8-hand horse, and that's not Little Sorrel by any stretch of the imagination. But this, rather, is Colonel Thomas J. Jackson, shown a little later with his general's uniform on there. But again, this is going to be that brigade commander in charge of these young men as well. So feel free to pass Mr. Jackson there around. Now, what did the soldiers think about Jackson? Now, today we have a pretty interesting view of Jackson. But the young men of the Liberty Hall Volunteers and other members of the what would become the Stonewall Brigade, the 1st Brigade, had a lot to say about Jackson as they started. The 1st Brigade itself participated a little bit in some fighting in the Upper Shenandoah Valley in early 1861, but they're mere skirmishes compared to what is soon to happen here at the Manassas battlefield. But Jackson was a very well-known drill master, taskmaster to his troops. And these soldiers from the 4th Virginia wrote kind of harshly about him. One man of the 4th Virginia writes this: "With the visor of his cap pulled down over his eyes, leaving no part of his face visible, but that covered by a full brown beard, his huge feet thrust to his ankles in the stirrups, he rode alone and had a faraway look on his face, as if oblivious to his surroundings." Another young man described Jackson as, quote, "is considered rigid to border on tyranny by the men around here. Some of them have been greatly surprised to get an insight into his character as a Christian man." Okay? So he's being questioned by his soldiers, lo and behold. But on July 19th of 1861, the entire Army of Shenandoah is going to board trains and move across the countryside here in Virginia to the Manassas Junction, just a little further to the south here, as the battle will soon rear its head here at the Manassas Plains. As Paxton and Ott disembarked from Manassas Junction, martial scenes are abounding, right? They're seeing military men, they're seeing men and equipment being moved off these trains, tens of thousands of men from every corner of the American South, uniforms in every different shade and color, as these officers cried out orders, train wheels screeched, the engines hissed, horses neighed and whinnied. Again, their military experience just from that time frame is just beginning. Now, Jackson's brigade was actually placed in reserve initially. What does that mean, to be placed in reserve? To hold, right? Not supposed to be in the main part of the fighting, main part of the combat, but only to be used as necessary. But on the morning of July 21st, 1861, 3 loud cannon blasts were heard a little further up the Bull Run Creek here, up the line, alerting the men to this coming engagement. By about 10 a.m., the field of battle roared here on the plains of Manassas as the fighting started just to your north. So to your left on the far bald hill, way up there, it's a little further out. You see the trail kind of going up that hillside. That's Matthews Hill. That's where the fighting started. But as the men of the 4th Virginia, and indeed the entire brigade under Thomas J. Jackson, hear their orders, they start to move from their place of reserve up towards this hillside. They're going to be maneuvering through the woods here, back past this area known as Portici, one of our tour stops back here. And this is the first time they see the glimpse of oncoming combat. One man says, from the 4th Virginia, Private John Lyle, "The wounded commenced passing us, some with blood streaming down their faces, some with their legs broken and hobbling along, assisted by a comrade, or some seriously wounded were borne on stretchers. Those who could talk could tell us that their commands had all been cut to pieces and that the day was lost. Such talk was very uninspiring to us raw troops. It was calculated to make a boy wish himself 1,000 miles away in a trundle bed at his mother's house." That is what these young men, Paxton and Ott, are experiencing. As these soldiers start to move into the wood line to our rear, they form a line of battle. So let's go ahead off to our next stop, roughly about where the 4th Virginia was in their line of battle. We're going to go down to the other end of this gun line here, and we'll talk about their experience. Yes, sir. They can walk and talk as well.
The artillery being set along here, and then the infantry being set up in the woods behind them. Are you still thinking artillery behind the infantry to fire over them and give support?
Yeah, and so, I mean, there is no conventional, statement saying you need to do X, Y, Z. But I think what's interesting here is, again, the individual helping to place this artillery is Thomas J. Jackson, is this Confederate colonel. Now, Jackson, at his previous position prior to being an officer in the Confederate Army, was a professor of artillery mathematics and trigonometry at the Virginia Military Institute. So he's kind of using and applying his own knowledge, his own expertise. And if we kind of pause for a second here and kind of look at this sloping ground. So look at the field in front of us here for a second. See how this land kind of rolls and falls, it rises and falls? So when we talk about like the crest of a hill, right? When you deploy artillery, you don't want to deploy on the top of the hill, on the physical crest, but you want to deploy on something called the military crest. It's a little bit further down, right? And you can use that slope to your advantage. So every time these cannons fire, they recoil, right? They recoil. So they recoil back down the slope. So every time these guns would fire, they would recoil down, and thus giving them some protection from Union artillery that you will eventually see over the kind of knob of that hill. So keep on looking out to your left as we move back this way, and you'll see that Union artillery line start to appear.
They're on their own military line.
Correct, absolutely.
You can actually visit Little Sorrel at VMI.
Yeah. Do they still having stuff for going and seeing? I thought they removed Little Sorrel.
Did they? Really? Okay. I haven't been down there in a while, but I thought
I haven't been
you're
down
still
there
there
in a while either. So it's been a minute. You could very well be right. So, all right. Do me a huge favor. Just kind of swing over this way and kind of either side of the cannon. Do make a good look around you. However, we've been having a recent. Large amount of wasps that like to be here on the battlefield as Steve Haraholtz walks away. He's like, absolutely not for me. Oh, Paul, I can go ahead and grab that Jackson photograph from you. I know you're fond of the man, but I figured I'll keep my photographs here in order. Alrighty, and you guys already know the drill. Alright, you guys are good to go. Okay. So as we think about the positioning of these soldiers, right? This brigade under Thomas J. Jackson. He does have another name. We'll talk about that a little later. But this brigade is starting to file into the woods behind you. So turn around here for a second. And again, there's 5 regiments here in this brigade. So as we go from our right to our left, moving across our front, you have the 33rd Virginia all the way on the right. You have the 2nd Virginia, and then the 27th Virginia. 4th Virginia, roughly about behind where we stand, and then the 5th Virginia off to our left. That's the entire brigade from right to left, right, as we're facing them. And so just to kind of show you how these soldiers are kind of oriented, I'm going to go ahead and show you this map. There's a lot of blue, and a lot of red, with not a lot of words on it, okay? What I will tell you is the red is the Confederate, the blue is the Union, and the yellow that I have conveniently circled for you is the 4th Virginia. It's number 15 there in red, but it's circled there in the yellow. So if you're ever to pass that around, just to get you some orientation, and again, the map is looking this way, right? So again, Confederates behind us, Union soldiers across the other side of the hill. So if you're ever to pass that around and take a look.
Kind of looks like they're standing on it next to each other.
Yeah, and I think what's important to keep in mind about First Manassas, it's a jumbled mess. I'll be flat honest with you. There's a lot of soldiers moving backwards and forwards. There's oftentimes regiments that overlap each other as well. But at least from this little segment, I hope this makes a little bit of sense. So again, please feel free to stop me and pause me if you need some orientation.
Roughly how many in the brigade were lined up?
Good question.
We're in a regiment, I think.
Yeah, so on
paper.
on paper it's supposed to be about 1,000. The entire brigade itself, you're looking at more about 2,500 at the time. 2,500 Virginians. All right, so again, 4th Virginia behind us. As these soldiers again start to align themselves in the woods behind us here, if we look across the field, maybe off to the left-hand side, it's a little hard to see, but there's going to start to be some Union artillery that starts to roll up. The horses and the artillery starts to deploy. There's going to be 2 batteries, so it's going to be about 11 guns. One of the batteries actually lost a gun as they're crossing over the Young's Branch. So about 11 Union cannons, and they start to unlimber and they start to pound away. You'll see the puffs of smoke come out of the cannons as these shells that they're firing are crashing over the heads of these Confederate soldiers behind us and our young men, William L. Paxton and William Baxter Ott. One Confederate officer writes and says, "The bursting of shells, the shrieking of cannonballs, the crashing as they splintered through the trees would have filled the soul of a warrior with ecstasy. Not being a warrior, but a plain citizen, I saw nothing especially entertaining in such hubbub. We lay as flat as flounders." What does that mean? No clue. They're down on the ground. They're staying out of the fight, staying out of the gunfire, right? As these shells are exploding in the trees above them. Now, as Paxton and Ott lie on their chests here on their Virginia soil, they're attempting to stay out of the fire. At approximately about 2:30 p.m., a Union shell explodes directly over the heads of the next company in line, the Fort Lewis Volunteers, spraying the men with hot chunks of iron, killing 3. Another shell screeched overhead, and another, each one of them seemingly hitting their marks here in the 4th Virginian ranks. One shell, unfortunately, it explodes right over the heads of the Liberty Hall Volunteers, and one of those iron shards strikes Corporal William L. Paxton here on the side. Flip around there for me. There you go. William L. Paxton here on the side, killing him instantly. On this hot July day, this 22-year-old William L. Paxton will be the first of the fallen of the regiment of the 4th Virginia. As chaos continues to engulf the battlefield here, Union infantry maneuver across the hillside towards this position. The first wave of which will be U.S. Marines, be Minnesotans here in the center, 1st Minnesota, and the 11th New York Fire Zouaves you were talking about before, coming up over the other side of the hill. They will be repulsed fairly quickly and fairly easily. But as these Union men retreat back, the gun crews here start to realize, and the infantrymen start to realize, that the Union artillery on the far side of that hill has no support. There's no infantry there protecting them. So Colonel Jackson gives the order for the brigade to fix bayonets, and one by one you'll start to see these regiments emerge from the tree line and move across the ground. So join me here as we go ahead and recreate the movement of the 4th Virginia across this battlefield. We're going to use this trail all the way over to that Union gun line, and we're going to go ahead and capture the guns. All right. That sound all right? Yeah. Fantastic. Very good. All right, Paul, I expect you to lead. You're at the front, my friend. Yeah.
Does it say First Maryland?
First Maryland, yeah.
Can you explain that to us?
First Maryland, yeah. So Maryland doesn't declare north or south. Yeah, if anyone hasn't seen that map, feel free to take a look. So Maryland does not declare to be a northern or southern state during the war. Instead, they send soldiers to both sides. So there's a First Maryland Confederate and First Maryland U.S. A little later on in the war, the Battle of Gettysburg, they actually end up fighting against each other, right? Marylanders fighting against Marylanders. But this Confederate Maryland regiment, they end up fighting a little later on down on Chin Ridge. That's an action that happens a little later in the war.
So doesn't Kentucky do the same thing?
Kentucky does the same exact thing, yeah.
West Virginia has a split even though they're officially Union.
And I think that's what's kind of interesting too, is that some of the men of Jackson's brigade, again, they're mainly from the Shenandoah Valley area, give or take. And so some of those men actually are originally from what we will call today West Virginia, right? But they still consider themselves Virginian. West Virginia doesn't actually form until much later. You have the Wheeling Convention, and they become a state in 1863. I think what's interesting is that early on in the war, some of those Virginians that stayed loyal to the U.S., they called themselves the First Virginia U.S., right? And then when West Virginia becomes a state, they switch their name. Now they're the First West Virginia, or 7th West Virginia, or so on and so forth from there. So it's kind of interesting to see that brother against brother fighting, right? All right, well, let's go ahead. Follow me this way, or go ahead and take the guns.
Yeah, it's just some constitutional maneuvering to allow West Virginia to execute under the Constitution. If we're in a case, and you're making a big point of it, process of war, Constitution does not allow you to that boundary without the legislature approving it. It has not done. And so the Supreme Court and there's sort of a wink and a nod, and they all said, well, you know, I was in Iraq, these boys were loyal to that Constitution.
Don't they put in some lame ducks as well during the Wheeling Convention? Don't they just put in some?
I don't know about the wheeler, but they did have two separate.
We have another amphibious crossing here, so.
Oh, man. I was looking at more for the country. Welcome to the Constitutional, welcome to Frederick, Elkhorn. There you go.
Not a good day to wear cross. Yeah, constitutionally it is interesting to consider.
Oh, there was a lot of wink and nods taking place during this time.
Oh yes, oh yes.
Hey sir, I have a follow-up question.
Yeah. As we're waiting for folks to cross.
Yeah, so regarding Maryland, now I want you to correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm just going on my memory, which isn't that great. But isn't it true that Maryland basically got taken over by the federal government because they wouldn't allow them to be a Confederate state because then the capital would be surrounded?
He did lock up the legislature.
Yeah, I mean, yes and no. So one of the big issues at that time as well, especially, is that, again, Lincoln is dealing with acts of insurrection happening in Maryland, cutting telegraph wires, destroying railroad ties as well. So he does end up suspending habeas corpus, and that's one of the biggest question marks that Lincoln does, I think, in the minds and eyes of many. But Maryland, again, is again, very much so a divided state. Some of the eastern edge of Maryland is very much so Southern sympathetic. Some of the western edge of Maryland, though, is very much so loyal Unionist as well. So it's not really as cut and dry as the federal government taking it over, but there is certainly a lot of finagling, shall we say, that goes on there to help protect the
was probably sympathetic to the Confederacy.
Very much so. Let's continue on as we move. Another one. My goodness. It's usually not that bad. Again, with all the rain we've been having.
A lot of times when they were told to fix bayonets, start going from, were their guns loaded?
Yeah.
Yeah, they were loaded.
They were indeed
They
loaded.
didn't have the cap on. They had the bayonet on. They would shoot it even with the bayonet on.
Yeah. And it depends really on what your effect is, right? If you're going for a surprise where the enemy is completely unaware, you will go ahead and load your weapons but not cap them in case they would be fired accidentally. In this case, however, we know for a fact that they are indeed loaded and capped because these soldiers are firing as they're maneuvering forward. Yep. And as we walk as well, feel free to look to your front and left. You start to see those guns turn into view. These are those same Union guns. They're now spraying you with canister as you're coming across this field.
Oh, that one.
Garrett, I was in Gods and Generals.
Were you?
Yeah. Yeah.
We're cutting off to the right.
Shot at Harper's Ferry.
Oh yeah?
Yeah.
So you remember that scene well?
A couple of them, yeah. I was, we did a hospital scene that they cut with Jeff Daniels, but we were supposed to, be ransacking Fredericksburg.
Right.
They did an awesome job with it. Really made the town look like Harper's Ferry. I mean, like Fredericksburg.
And they used the town?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Are you a recreator?
I used to be. Yeah, way back when.
Yeah, when I was young, I always thought they like built the set because I remember going to Fredericksburg and eating at that malt shop, the pharmacy shop. And like, there's no way they could have done that.
Yep.
Yeah, Harvest Fair is it's like a tourist trapping, but it's neat to visit.
It is, yeah.
Even though it's kind of fakey, but it's still neat.
cool.
Because, it's still cool.
If it didn't have the fakey, it wouldn't still be.
Right, it wouldn't still be. You're right. But it's kind of neat because it is kind of like an old town.
But during the shooting, they did have some of the old obviously the whole lower town is the way it was back in the day, but they did fill in gaps with what looked to be like a full home, and it was just 2x4s, and it's really something the way they do it. I was in Guys and Generals. Yep.
I remember the scene.
Almost was in Gettysburg. I couldn't make it though.
I remember the scene in Gettysburg where we actually see Gettysburg in the background, and it looks like a town from the era, except for the modern roads that we see in the background.
Yeah, there's one scene that I think in Gettysburg where they caught a van way off in the distance.
I did notice that. I did notice the modern roads.
Oh, they did that. What happened in Lord of the Rings too?
Yeah, did it really?
There's a scene where they're leaving the Shire.
We keep the grass kind of high a little bit because one of the big things is on this field. This is all farm fields. This is all rented out farm fields. It belonged to a widow by the name of Judith Carter Henry. Her home would have been right here, where this wooden house is. The historic home during the First Battle was a single-story home. That was a smaller building, single-story. And Judith Carter Henry, she's an 84-year-old widow by the time of the American Civil War. And so she's really up there in age. Again, not really expecting war to come knocking at her physical doorstep. I think what's rather tragic, and we'll go ahead underneath this tree here. It's a nice shady spot. I think what's rather tragic is that as these Union guns come up on either side of the house, again, 2 batteries. You have Ricketts here to the right, or excuse me, your left, my right, and then Griffin here to your right, my left. And as they're thundering away, they suspect that there are Confederate sharpshooters here in this house. So they turn their guns to the structure. Captain James B. Ricketts ultimately says that they literally, quote, riddled the house with shell. There's about 3 rounds of shell that explode inside the structure, killing this 84-year-old widow, right? So that's one of the tragedies here, the Battle of First Manassas. I think a lot of people have, maybe lose some context here and say, oh, this Yankees firing on civilians. It's important to note, again, everyone north and south was entirely inexperienced. And that fog of war really weighs on these soldiers as they're firing.
And she went back into the house.
Yeah,
Tough. In the middle of the battle.
And she is being carried by her family members. Again, she's an elderly woman. She's being carried out in a mattress. A doctor described her in 1860 as, quote, half blind, half deaf, and largely bedridden. So they do try and carry her out with a mattress. Thank you, sir. But they don't make it too far. They make it roughly about where the spot of that tree is down there. It is a natural spring as well, so you'll see a lot of springs pop up, hence why all the water. Anyway, long way to say that this is a working farm in 1861, is what I'm trying to say. Mainly hay up on this fields, on the top of this hill. If we look out kind of diagonally past the monument here, you'll see a spur of that hill that juts out. That is the Robinson farm. There's a small field of flax down over there. Behind the house on Matthews Hill, there's a large field of corn as well. So this is all working agricultural landscape. Absolutely. All right, so we did it. We made that far walk. I apologize. That's the longest distance we're going to walk, and we're going to finish up here. If you look back at where we started, back at that Confederate gun line, the distance itself is only about 300 or so yards, right? So as these Confederate soldiers are moving quickly across this landscape, they're moving and charging with their bayonets. You may start to hear, if we're standing here now in the spot, these Union gunners, these cannoneers, you may start to hear yells and cheers. Feel free to pass this image around as you go. These yells and cheers, one Union soldier will say, quote, sounds like a pack of wild demons or dogs preparing to devour their prey.
Are they being led by officers on horseback?
So not on horseback. Jackson, and everyone kind of tends to believe Jackson is kind of back right exactly where the statue is. I don't know exactly where Jackson is, let's put it that way, but mostly it's going to be their regimental officers and company officers. So when you have your line of battle, you have every single company. Those company officers will be in charge of their companies. Again, they're the ones making sure their men are moving forward. They have their swords out in their hands, maybe even their scabbard or their sabers, keeping a nice straight line. So they're being led by their own individual officers, not the brigade officers. But as they're moving, again, they're yelling, they're cheering. But as these Union soldiers are hearing and experiencing these sounds for the first time on the battlefield, again, one man says that the yells sound like, quote, a pack of wild demons or dogs preparing to devour their prey. Another man says that it's, quote, sent a corkscrew-like sensation down my spine each and every time I heard it on the battlefield. I am, of course, talking about the now infamous Confederate rebel yell, first used here at the Battle of First Manassas. So as these Confederate soldiers are moving closer, and try to imagine yourselves as these Confederates are sweeping across the land, smashing right into the cannons here, right? Right into these gunners. These gunners do not have rifles themselves. They are largely helpless. They're trying to defend their guns using anything they can. Their implements, their tools, pistols, swords, even hands in many cases. But as these Confederates, including those in the 4th Virginia, crash into the guns, it is a fierce melee, bayonet stabbing, musket butts swinging, crashing, and killing and maiming Union gunners as they're here on the guns. These Union gunners under Ricketts Battery start to flee down the hill and into the mass of Union soldiers in the road waiting to advance. So now we are in the footsteps of the 4th Virginia, right? As they're here now along the gun line, they're pouring fire down into those Union soldiers, and at some point in the late afternoon, at about 3:30, 3:35, another young man, William Baxter Ott, go ahead and show him to everyone there, ends up catching a bullet in the chest. Private William Baxter Ott was again shot through the chest, died shortly thereafter. But I think it's important to note that this is a college company, right? So all these young men have lived together at Washington College, are fighting together, and now, unfortunately, are dying together. Ott's classmates, B.A. Bradley and C.W. Bell, were also noted as being killed in that charge with the same exact bullet. One of Ott's cousins, Cyrus D. Strickler, was also noted as being killed in the same exact company. One of Paxton's classmates, back there, H.L. Wilson, was killed in that same charge with a gunshot directly through the head. Even a young Washington College freshman, an 18-year-old, Calvin Utz, was not immune to the fire, also falling dead to a piece of shell as they had moved across the field. From students to soldiers, William L. Paxton and Private William Baxter Ott, they represent a young group of men that ultimately are eager to prove themselves in the battlefield. Again, the age range for these soldiers in this company, about 18 to about 25 years old. But only when they enter combat here at the battlefield of First Manassas do they understand the true destructive nature of battle. The battle here at First Manassas helps to represent not just a loss of innocence, but also a loss of life as these young men shed their lives here on this plain. Now, but as these soldiers, again, had fought and passed here, roughly about where we stand and where we once stood, on the line of the 4th Virginia, it's important to note that, again, I'm not going to regale you with the rest of the battle, because for our two soldiers, their time is up. But as the battle comes to a close, at about 6 p.m., 7 p.m. on July 21st, 1861, the 4th Virginia was paid a visit by a very important person, Confederate General P.G.T. Beauregard, and legend has it, he cheers the regiment vociferously, take that as you want, and the Lexington Gazette had talked about how important he noted the 4th's charge was. But despite the revelry, the hard task remained, not just the fighting, but now burying the dead. Soldiers had scoured the battlefield to find the bodies of their friends and families. Members of the Liberty Hall Volunteers retraced their steps, the same exact steps we just now took, that same pathway, right? And they found, of course, the bodies of their friends and schoolmates, Corporal William L. Paxton and Private William Baxter Ott. Now, like many soldiers, Paxton and Ott were placed in a grave together on the battlefield, right? Oftentimes, companies or units will place their dead in the same exact mass grave, and along with them, the other Liberty Hall volunteers, the other students turned soldiers, Bradley, Wilson, Bell, Strickler, and Utz, along with Paxton and, of course, Ott. I think it's important to note, as these soldiers had lived together in college campuses and dorms, some even sharing rooms, now they physically share the same grave on the battlefield. Now, the rest of the brigade under Thomas J. Jackson was christened the name Stonewall Brigade, and their commander's new sobriquet, and that continued throughout the war as well. Paxton, Ott, and other Liberty Hall volunteers were frequently remembered by many of those Stonewall men as some of the first lives that were lost in the American Civil War. One of Ott's brothers, in fact, Franklin Augustus Ott, is actually inspired by his brother's sacrifice and ends up taking up the sword and joining the Confederate Army as well. He joins the Confederate Cavalry Unit a little later. After the war concludes, however, there's a local widow, Lucinda Dogan. She lives about 2 miles to our direct west here, going down on 29. And she donates some of her personal lands to rebury some of the Confederate dead. Many of these soldiers were exhumed from their resting places here on the battlefield and placed into that smaller plot today we call Groveton Confederate Cemetery. I highly recommend, if you haven't been there before, get in your car and drive out there. It's small, it's a tiny little place, but I think it's really powerful. And, of course, 2 of our soldiers, Paxton and Ott, were, at least we suspect, reburied in those same state plots at the Groveton Confederate Cemetery. Again, the records are a little scarce in terms of who individually was there. We know, again, that Ott and Paxton were in the same grave, but whether or not they all made it to the same place, we just don't know for certain. Now, it's important to note that because these young men lost their lives, their stories, however, are not over. Paxton's father, William Squire Paxton, again, that devoted Presbyterian, and he subscribed to a publication that we call the Central Presbyterian. It was a news journal, a religious journal rather. It was a monthly subscription, and one of these editions that were sent out after the Battle of First Manassas was sent out again to try and cheer people up, to give them some sort of meaning behind their possible sons or husbands' sacrifice in that battle. The July 27th, 1861 edition, in response to the first major battle of the war, suggested a sermon for folks to give and ministers to give across the state of Virginia. And this sermon was this: "Cheer up, despairing soul. Why art thou cast down? Hope in God. Does it seem as if your father or husband or brother had forsaken you? You are mistaken. Yes, they love you much, and have gone to lay down their lives for you if need be. Yea, if God was with them in the war, He'll be with you at home. He'll be more to you than a father, a husband, or a brother combined." I don't know what William Squire Paxton, thought about this sermon. He never wrote or talked about that, but maybe it gave him just a little bit of solace after his son's loss here on the battlefield of Manassas. As if their loss of their sons weren't enough, war will soon find both these families, both the Paxton and Ott families. The Paxton family will file for compensation after their son's death, filed on April 15th, 1862, and they will receive a grand total of $13.10 for their son's death. Monthly. Monthly, yeah, monthly.
Still not great.
Still not great, no. Especially if it's Confederate money, might I add. The Ott family will also lose large amounts of property as the war ravaged their home in 1864 during some of the later parts of the war in the Shenandoah Valley, as they would burn Confederate families' farms in that section in Augusta County. William Henry Ott, this is the grandfather now, since Ott's Ott's father had passed, had filed for claims in the Southern Claims Commission in 1872. Part of the claim filing would be to take an oath revoking any previous loyalties to the Confederacy. Now think about this for a second. Who took an oath to defend the Confederacy in that Ott family? William Baxter Ott, right? And now what are they asking the grandfather, William Henry Ott, to do? Take an oath revoking the Confederacy and revoking his grandson, right? Now William Henry Ott will refuse to do this. And with it, the Ott's family claim was rejected. They received zero monetary compensation for the loss of their family property. Now both Paxton and Ott, these are 2 individual soldiers. We can learn a lot from their personal experience on the battlefield, but it tells you a lot about the war. It gives you some context about who these individuals are, why they're fighting, how they fought, and ultimately where they died here on the Manassas Plains. Both Corporal William L. Paxton and Private William Baxter Ott represent 2 soldiers that lost their lives here at First Manassas. To many, they may simply just be a casualty, a statistic, a figure, but by walking their footsteps, by seeing their names, their faces here, and their stories, we are able to see them much more than just that. They are indeed faces of the fallen. Thanks for coming along, folks. Hope you all enjoy. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you, yeah. Absolutely, thank you.